My name is Michael Turner. I am 41 years old, and I live in a middle-class suburb just outside of Columbus, Ohio. When my wife Jennifer and I bought our two-story brick house 8 years ago, we thought we had finally found peace. A backyard big enough for cookouts, a swing set for our two kids, a maple tree that turned fiery red every October, and a white vinyl fence that seemed like it would keep trouble out. For a while, it worked. The neighborhood looked like something out of a Home Depot commercial. Dads pushing lawnmowers on Saturdays, kids selling lemonade, moms unloading Costco hauls from the back of their SUVs. But as every American knows, even the most manicured cul-de-sacs can hide monsters behind the blinds. Mine came in the form of a neighbor named Chad and his Pitbull, Diesel. Chad moved in about 2 years ago. Divorced, mid-30s, always shirtless, always drinking a tall can of Bud Light on the porch even at 10 in the morning. The kind of man who proudly displayed a Trump 2024 flag, a "Don't Tread on Me" bumper sticker, and a collection of rusting F-150 parts in his driveway. At first, I tried to be civil. I offered him a handshake when he was unloading his U-Haul. He grunted something about not liking city people, even though I was born in Dayton and had lived in Ohio all my life. The very next week, he brought home Diesel, a pit bull with a thick neck, cropped ears, and a growl that rattled through the fence like a chainsaw. Now, let me make this clear. I do not hate dogs. I grew up with a golden retriever named Buddy. My wife has a framed picture of her childhood Cocker Spaniel still sitting on our mantle. But Diesel was not Buddy, and Chad was not the kind of man who trained or cared for his animal. Diesel was chained outside all day, rain or shine, growling at squirrels, barking at passing kids, throwing himself against the fence as though he wanted to tear it down with his teeth. My kids stopped playing outside. Jennifer stopped gardening. I stopped drinking my Saturday morning coffee on the porch because every sip was punctuated by barking. Diesel was not just a dog. He was a weapon, and Chad knew it. The first time Diesel jumped the fence into my yard, it was a Sunday afternoon. Jennifer was grilling chicken, my kids were chasing each other around with water balloons, and suddenly this 100-pound beast was in our grass, teeth bared, eyes locked on us. I froze. My kids screamed. Diesel charged. Thank God, Jennifer had the presence of mind to spray him with the garden hose until he bolted back toward Chad's yard. I stormed over, dripping sweat and fear, demanding an explanation. Chad just smirked, Bud Light in hand, and said, "Dogs will be dogs. Maybe build a higher fence if you're scared." I wanted to hit him right there, but I walked back home instead. My hands shook as I tried to eat that chicken, every bite tasting like metal. At first, I tried the polite route. I printed out the city's leash and containment ordinances, highlighted the sections, and taped them to Chad's door. I offered to split the cost of a reinforced fence. I even tried being friendly, dropping off a bag of dog treats from PetSmart. Chad laughed, tossed the papers into his recycling bin, and muttered loud enough for me to hear, "City boy thinks he can tell me what to do." Diesel stayed outside. Diesel barked louder. Diesel leapt the fence again the following week. Emotionally, it wore me down. I am not ashamed to admit I cried one night after putting my kids to bed. I wanted to give them the kind of suburban childhood every American father dreams of. Riding bikes, chasing fireflies, roasting marshmallows in the backyard fire pit. Instead, my son had nightmares about the growling monster. My daughter asked if we could move. Jennifer tried to comfort me, but I saw the stress lines forming around her eyes too. This was not just a dog problem. It was the classic American horror, bad neighbors. The kind you cannot escape without losing the home you worked your life for. One evening, while Diesel barked himself hoarse under the full moon, I scrolled Reddit on my phone and found myself deep in the Our Neighbor from Hell subreddit. Stories about barking dogs, illegal backyard junkyards, chainsaw mornings, even a guy who built a wall of mirrors to reflect his neighbor's floodlights. Some stories ended in cathartic revenge, insurance fraud, zoning violations, lawsuits. Others ended in despair. But what struck me was the solidarity. Across America, from Florida to Oregon, people were fighting their bad neighbors with the tools of paperwork, patience, and persistence. A thought settled in my mind like a stone. I was not powerless. Still, the problem grew. Diesel leapt to the fence a third time, this time tearing up my wife's flower bed. Another time, he cornered a delivery driver in our driveway. I had evidence now. Videos from my Ring camera, timestamps, pictures of torn-up soil. I called animal control, filed a complaint with the city, sent a strongly worded email to our HOA. Weeks passed. A letter went out to Chad, but nothing changed. If anything, Diesel was outside longer. It felt deliberate, like Chad was taunting me, daring me to push harder. He would smirk across the property line, shirtless and smug, raising his Bud Light as if to say, "What are you gonna do about it?" That night, lying awake while Diesel barked into the darkness, I realized this was no longer about noise or safety. This was about territory. Chad thought he owned the block. He thought he could bully his way into making me submit, into shrinking back behind closed curtains. He thought bad neighbors win by default because good people stay quiet. But I was done being quiet. The battle lines were drawn, not with fists or shouts, but with files, forms, and laws. My enemy was not just Chad. It was the system of apathy that let him thrive. My weapons would not be garden hoses or angry confrontations. They would be city codes, federal insurance loopholes, nuisance lawsuits, and bureaucratic nightmares. If Chad wanted war, he was about to meet the dull but relentless force of the American paper trail. And as I lay in bed, a strange calm came over me. Diesel growled outside, but I almost welcomed the sound. It was the growl of my enemy announcing himself. And in that sound, I heard my motivation. This was not just about me anymore. It was about proving that bad neighbors could be defeated, not with a higher fence, but with a smarter plan. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of hangover you do not get from beer, but from rage. My head was pounding with all the noise Diesel had made the night before, and my body felt like it had gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight fighter. I poured myself a mug of black coffee, stared out the kitchen window, and there he was again. Diesel, pacing the fence line like a prison guard, hackles up, eyes fixed on my yard. It was no longer just noise. It was intimidation, a message from Chad. Jennifer came into the kitchen, still in her robe, and whispered, "Mike, this cannot keep going. We cannot live like this." She was right. We had bought peace and instead inherited chaos. I kissed her forehead and promised, "I will handle it." And for the first time in months, I meant it with steel in my voice. That afternoon, I took the first shot in what I would later call my paperwork war. I drove to City Hall with a folder stuffed full of evidence, photos of Diesel in my yard, videos of him barking past midnight, written statements from my kids describing how scared they felt. I filed a formal nuisance complaint and requested a hearing. The clerk looked at my stack of documents and said, "Wow, you came prepared." That was the moment I realized. This battle would not be fought with fists, but with binders. A week later, a letter arrived in Chad's mailbox. I know because I was waiting at my front window, sipping iced tea, watching the mail truck stop at his house. He tore the envelope open, skimmed it, and then laughed loud enough for me to hear. He crumpled the paper and tossed it into his pile of empty Bud Light cans. My stomach sank. But then I reminded myself, the first letter is never the last. Bureaucracy is like quicksand. You do not drown instantly. You sink slowly, paperwork by paperwork. The escalation was inevitable. Diesel broke into my yard again, this time ripping the mesh off my kid's trampoline. My son cried for hours. My daughter refused to play outside at all. I snapped. I called animal control, the HOA, the county sheriff, and even our homeowner's insurance company in the same afternoon. I explained that Diesel was not just a nuisance, but a liability waiting to happen. The insurance agent perked up. "You said the dog has already jumped into your yard multiple times. You might want to document that thoroughly. If he bites someone, his owner could lose coverage." That sentence lit a fire in me. The next phase of my campaign became financial. I began keeping a daily log, written like a police report. Time, date, activity, description. March 16th, 3:14 p.m. Diesel barked continuously for 42 minutes. March 18th, 6:07 p.m. Diesel leapt fence, trampled vegetable garden, tore tomato plants. My Ring camera automatically backed up every clip to the cloud. I uploaded everything to a hidden Google Drive folder, labeled Operation Bad Neighbors. Jennifer thought the name was ridiculous, but I told her it was war, and every war needs a code name. 2 weeks later, I mailed a packet of that evidence not just to animal control, but to Chad's insurance company. I had looked it up through public records, an old trick I learned reading revenge stories online. If Diesel was deemed aggressive, the premiums would skyrocket, and in suburban America, nothing cuts deeper than a letter from your insurance provider. Of course, Chad noticed. One Saturday evening, as I was taking out the trash, he leaned over the fence and said, "You think you're smart, huh? Running to the city, calling your little agencies, sending letters like some kind of lawyer? Guess what, pal? Diesel's not going anywhere." His smirk was sharp enough to draw blood, but I did not take the bait. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Then neither am I." Emotionally, I was changing. I used to feel helpless, like the victim of noise and fear. Now I felt like a man with a plan, a soldier with a mission. The barking was still maddening, but it fueled me. Every growl was another line of evidence. Every bark was another nail in Chad's financial coffin. I began to see him not as an untouchable bully, but as a man surrounded by invisible traps, each one tied to a statute, a fine, or an ordinance. The breaking point came one humid July evening. Jennifer and I invited two other couples over for a barbecue, trying to reclaim some normalcy. We set out burgers, hot dogs, and cold Budweisers, the kids splashing in a kiddie pool. Just as I flipped the burgers, Diesel launched himself over the fence and bolted straight toward the grill. Chaos erupted. Kids screamed. My neighbor's wife dropped her beer. I grabbed the spatula like it was a sword. But Jennifer once again saved us by blasting Diesel with the garden hose until he scrambled back. My guests packed up early, shaken. The night ended with me standing in the smoke of half-cooked burgers, staring at the fence, and vowing that I would not let Chad win. The very next day, I filed a small claims lawsuit for property damage and emotional distress. The clerk raised an eyebrow at my evidence folder and said, "You have a strong case." That night, I served the papers myself, sliding the envelope into Chad's mailbox while Diesel growled on the porch. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes when he read the summons. But lawsuits were just the beginning. I dove deeper. I learned that our county had a noise ordinance that allowed daily fines of up to $250 for excessive animal noise. I called code enforcement and filed a formal noise complaint. I discovered that our HOA had the power to levy monthly fines for pets creating disturbances. I requested a board hearing. I even contacted the Department of Agriculture's local office, since technically Diesel's outdoor conditions might qualify as neglect. By August, the pressure was mounting. Letters from the HOA, warnings from animal control, notices from code enforcement, and now a court date. Chad's swagger began to crack. He stopped smirking when I passed. He started bringing Diesel inside during the day. The barking lessened, though the growling never truly stopped. Late one night, as I sat at my desk surrounded by folders, I realized how surreal it had become. I was no longer just a suburban dad. I was a one-man agency, a bureaucratic vigilante armed with statutes instead of shotguns, forms instead of fists. I imagined myself as the director of a secret organization called the Suburban Justice Bureau, fighting bad neighbors across America with the power of paperwork. The thought made me laugh, a sharp release of months of tension. But beneath the satire, the truth was real. I had turned the tide. I was no longer reacting. I was controlling the narrative. This was no longer just about a barking pitbull. It was about showing that in America, even the loudest bully could be brought down by the quiet persistence of someone who refused to quit. And as I filed away another form that night, I whispered to myself, bad neighbors do not win forever. They just think they do. By the time September rolled around, the war with Chad had taken on a rhythm, almost like football season. Mondays meant checking my mailbox for city responses. Wednesdays were HOA meeting nights, where I slid manila envelopes of evidence across plastic tables like I was briefing the Pentagon. Fridays, I logged into my insurance portal to track any updates on the claim. It was absurd, really. I was living in a quiet Ohio suburb, yet my life felt like an episode of Homeland starring a dad in cargo shorts and New Balance sneakers. And the enemy was not a terrorist cell, but a shirtless neighbor with a pit bull and a cooler full of Bud Light. I thought I was handling it all just fine until one evening when Jennifer sat me down at the kitchen table. "Mike," she said, her voice soft but edged with worry, "you are obsessed. Every night it is forms, calls, letters. What if this consumes you?" I looked at her across the table, the same woman I promised safety and peace when we bought this house. "Jen," I said, "I know it looks crazy, but this is bigger than us. This is about bad neighbors everywhere. People like Chad think they can terrorize good families and hide behind the fence. If I stop, he wins. If I keep going, maybe we win. and maybe others learn they can too. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Just do not lose yourself in this fight. And her words stuck with me. For a few days, I stepped back, tried to focus on normal life. I took the kids to Dairy Queen. I mowed the lawn without obsessing over the fence line. But bad neighbors never stay quiet. One Saturday afternoon, Diesel jumped the fence again. This time, he barreled into my kids' inflatable pool, shredding it with his claws. Water poured across the yard like a busted hydrant, toys floating toward the driveway. My kids screamed, Jennifer shouted, and I stood frozen, holding the mower handle like a useless weapon. Chad came out laughing, calling Diesel back, no apology in sight. That laugh, it broke me. That night, as Diesel barked under the moonlight, I opened my laptop and typed "Federal Dog Bite Liability Insurance Loopholes" into Google. I fell down a rabbit hole of legal blogs, Reddit threads, even a PDF guide written by some retired animal control officer in Arizona. By midnight, I had a plan that was no longer just local. I was going federal. Here is where the story drifts into the surreal, the almost satirical. I imagined myself not just as Michael Turner of Columbus, Ohio, but as Agent Turner of the Federal Suburban Defense Initiative. My mission, to dismantle Chad using the most un-American thing he could imagine, government paperwork. I pictured a war room under my basement, maps of the neighborhood pinned with red string, stacks of binders labeled Operation Bad Neighbors, and in the middle, a photo of Chad holding Diesel's leash, smirking like a wanted man. The first strike in this next phase was contacting the USDA, specifically their Animal Welfare Division. It was a long shot, but technically Diesel's outdoor conditions bordered on neglect. I filed a complaint under the Animal Welfare Act, citing improper shelter and excessive exposure. The form felt like launching a missile. Next, I wrote to the Ohio Department of Insurance, attaching all my evidence and highlighting the words, known aggressive animal. If Diesel bit someone, Chad's homeowner's policy could be voided. Without coverage, he would be one lawsuit away from financial ruin. But I did not stop there. I started researching noise lawsuits in other states, looking for precedent. I found a case in Texas where a man won $30,000 against his neighbor for loss of enjoyment of property due to a barking dog. I printed the case file, highlighted it, and slid it into my binder. I even called a lawyer downtown, one of those sharp-suited men whose office walls were lined with law degrees. He smirked at first, but after I showed him my stack of evidence, his eyebrows rose. "You have a strong nuisance claim," he said. "If this goes to trial, you could bury him in fees." By now, my life had become a blend of the mundane and the bizarre. I would pack my kids' lunches in the morning, drive them to school, then spend the afternoon drafting legal memos and pretending I was running a shadow government agency. My coworkers at the steel plant noticed the change. "Mike, you seem intense lately," one said. I just smiled and muttered, "Bad neighbors. You would not understand." The climax came on a Sunday in late September. Chad threw a backyard party, dozen trucks parked on the street, country music blasting, fireworks at dusk. Diesel was chained outside the whole time, barking his head off. I recorded every minute from my upstairs window, the footage looking like something out of a surveillance thriller. Then it happened. One of Chad's drunk friends teased Diesel, dangling a hot dog in front of him. Diesel lunged so hard that the chain snapped, and he bolted across 3 yards before animal control, already on the scene from my noise complaint, tackled the situation. It was chaos, shouting, barking, flashing lights, and for the first time, I saw fear in Chad's eyes, not of me, but of the system. Within a week, Diesel was impounded for evaluation. Chad received multiple citations: noise, neglect, public safety. His insurance company sent a cancellation notice. The HOA slapped him with fines. The sheriff served him papers for my nuisance lawsuit. 1 man, 1 dog, 1 yard, now buried under a mountain of official documents. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was stranger. It was like watching a conspiracy unfold, one I had orchestrated from my living room. I half expected black SUVs to roll down the street, men in suits stepping out to shake my hand for service to the nation. It was absurd, hilarious even, but at the same time deeply satisfying. The paper war had worked, and yet, in the quiet that followed, I also felt something else. Pity. For Diesel mostly. He was not the villain. He was a victim of neglect, of a man too lazy and selfish to care for him properly. The real villain had always been Chad, the quintessential bad neighbor, loud, careless, dismissive of everyone else's peace. Diesel had just been his weapon, and now that weapon had been taken away. That night, sitting on my porch in blessed silence, I thought about what Jennifer said, that I might lose myself in this fight. Maybe I had, but maybe it was worth it, because for the first time in months, I could hear crickets instead of barking, and I knew the war was not over yet. This was just the breaking point. The real victory, or the real lesson, was still to come. When October arrived, the leaves in Ohio burned gold and red, and for the first time in months, my backyard sounded like a backyard should. Quiet, except for the rustle of branches and the chatter of squirrels. Diesel was gone, impounded by animal control pending evaluation. Chad's yard looked strangely empty without the dog pacing and growling, though the emptiness carried its own kind of menace. It was like watching a storm cloud disappear on the horizon, but still knowing it could circle back. I did not trust Chad, not for a second. Bad neighbors never surrender gracefully. They retreat, regroup, and then come back nastier. But this time, I was ready. I was not just some tired dad with a garden hose anymore. I was, in my own mind, Commander Turner of the Suburban Justice Bureau, armed with case files, citations, and a growing list of allies. My war had gone national. I had spoken with insurance investigators, animal welfare officers, even a federal clerk who promised to flag the file for further review. I had created a paper maze so dense that Chad could barely see daylight, and now I was going to finish the job. The first domino fell with the insurance cancellation. A few days after Diesel was seized, Chad got a letter taped to his door in bold red font. Notice of policy termination. Without coverage, he was living on borrowed time. One lawsuit, one accident, one more complaint, and the man could lose everything. He stormed across the lawn, waving the letter at me like a flag. "You did this, Turner," he shouted. "You think you're clever, but you're just a coward hiding behind paper." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Paper is what built this country, Chad. Deeds, laws, the Constitution. You should read it sometime." He turned red, muttered something about snitches, and stomped back home. The second domino was financial. The HOA, emboldened by the mounting complaints, started fining Chad $150 a week for failure to comply with pet containment and noise ordinances. The Code Enforcement Office added municipal fines on top of that. It was death by paperwork, slow but merciless. I imagined his mailbox as a war drum, pounding with every new envelope, every new fee. He had once laughed when official letters arrived. Now I saw him rip them open with trembling hands, the swagger draining from his face. The third domino came from an unexpected source, his employer. Someone, I will not say who, though my conscience is not entirely clear, sent an anonymous packet of documentation to the HR department of the warehouse where Chad worked. Photos of Diesel leaping fences, police reports, HOA notices. The message was clear. This man is a liability. Within weeks, I noticed Chad was home during the day, drinking earlier, looking defeated. It did not take a genius to guess that his job had either cut him loose or put him on probation. It might sound cruel, but remember this. He had laughed when my children cried. He had mocked me when my wife begged for peace. He had treated Diesel not as a companion, but as a weapon to terrorize the neighborhood. This was not just revenge. This was justice in the most American form, through money, law, and accountability. Still, I did not want to destroy him completely. Odd as it sounds, I wanted him to learn. So my next move was not another attack, but a negotiation. I drafted a letter, not in anger, but in plain legal English. Mr. Chad Wilson, due to repeated violations and ongoing disturbances, I am prepared to escalate legal action, which may include further civil suits. However, if you agree to the following conditions: 1. Diesel shall not be returned to your property unless kept indoors. 2. All fines shall be paid in full. 3. A permanent barrier shall be erected between properties. Then I will withdraw my pending lawsuit. I mailed it certified, signature required. 3 days later, I found him on my porch, letter in hand. His eyes were bloodshot, his face unshaven. For the first time, there was no smirk. "I cannot afford this anymore, man," he muttered. "I will do what you want. Just enough with the letters." It was not victory music blaring from the heavens, but it was close. But here is where the story twists again, into the surreal conspiracy territory that had become my coping mechanism. Because even as Chad agreed, I could not shake the feeling that I had uncovered a hidden truth about America itself. Bad neighbors were not just a nuisance, they were a symptom. A symptom of a country where people thought their yard was a kingdom, their dog a weapon, their rights endless and unchecked. And people like me, we were the quiet resistance, the paper soldiers armed with statutes and patience. In my mind, I was no longer just fighting Chad. I was part of a nationwide movement, a secret league of homeowners rising up against the chaos of suburbia. I pictured an underground bunker in Washington, D.C., where binders full of complaints were tracked like enemy troop movements. And on a giant map, my cul-de-sac had a red pin. Turner versus Wilson, status victory pending. Of course, the reality was less cinematic. Chad began keeping Diesel inside. The fines tapered off once he complied with the HOA. My lawsuit hung over his head until he signed a settlement agreeing to cover the damages to my yard and trampoline. Slowly, the street returned to normal. Kids played basketball in driveways. Families grilled without fear. My daughter picked tomatoes again. The silence in my yard felt like a reward, a treasure reclaimed. One night, sitting on my porch with a cold beer, Jennifer asked me, "Do you think it was worth it? All the stress, all the paperwork?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "Yes," I said, "because he learned. And because I learned that peace does not come free. Sometimes you have to fight for it, not with fists, but with persistence." But the real kicker came a month later. A neighbor down the street, a quiet man named Harris, stopped me while I was raking leaves. "Hey, Turner," he said, glancing around nervously. "How did you do it? With Chad, I mean. My neighbor's got 3 German shepherds that bark all night. You think you could show me how to fight back?" I laughed, realizing the irony. I had become the neighborhood's unofficial strategist, the go-to man for suburban conflict. The conspiracies in my head suddenly felt less like fantasies and more like reality. Maybe there really was a league of us, scattered across the country, ordinary dads and moms waging quiet wars against the chaos of bad neighbors. And in that moment, I knew the battle with Chad was not just a personal victory. It was training. Training for a larger war, one that every homeowner faces sooner or later. Because in America, you can pick your house, but you cannot pick your neighbors. And when bad neighbors arrive, you either bow your head or you fight. Winter came early that year. By late November, frost was already painting the rooftops, and the maple tree in my backyard stood bare, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The silence was thick, almost holy. No barking, no growling, no sound of claws scraping against the fence, just the hum of a distant highway and the occasional crunch of a neighbor's footsteps on frosted grass. For the first time in almost a year, my family could breathe in peace. My son built a snowman without fear of a dog charging. My daughter laughed as she made snow angels. Jennifer finally hung Christmas lights on the back deck, something she had refused to do when the yard felt like a battlefield. It was over, or so I thought, because peace, I learned, is never just peace when you have lived through bad neighbors. It comes laced with memories, with paranoia, with the subtle ache of knowing it could all come back. And in those quiet nights by the fireplace, I found myself thinking about Diesel. Where was he now? Was he locked in some shelter cage, pacing in circles, waiting for an owner who did not deserve him? Or had he been adopted by someone who actually cared, someone who gave him warmth and discipline instead of neglect and chains? For all the fury I had directed at Chad, I realized Diesel had been just as much a victim. He had never asked to be a soldier in his owner's petty war. This thought haunted me, because in the end, my revenge had worked. The lawsuits, the fines, the insurance cancellations, they all crushed Chad into submission. He kept Diesel indoors, he paid the damages, he stopped with the smirking threats. But what did it prove? That I could win? Sure, but also that in America, peace was often bought with paperwork and punishment, not kindness. I had fought like a bureaucratic warrior, and I had won. Yet sometimes, when I looked at the empty yard next door, I wondered if I had lost something too. Jennifer noticed my mood one night as we decorated the Christmas tree. "You miss the fight, don't you?" she asked, threading silver garland through the branches. I chuckled softly. "Miss it? No, but I think I got used to it. Every letter I sent, every form I filed, it gave me purpose, like I was part of something bigger." She touched my hand gently. You stood up for us. You showed the kids that bad neighbors do not get to decide how we live." Her words comforted me, but they also planted a seed. Was this who I had become? The neighborhood crusader? The man who turned paperwork into weapons? Maybe so, because not 2 weeks later, another neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, came to my door clutching a binder. "Mike," she said in a hushed voice, "you are the only one who can help." The Johnsons put up floodlights that shine straight into my bedroom window all night. I heard what you did with Chad. Could you maybe show me how? I took the binder from her hands and felt a strange mix of pride and dread. Pride because my campaign had inspired others. Dread because I realized this might never end. One battle finishes, another begins. Maybe that is the curse of suburbia. You do not just buy a house. You inherit every war that comes with it. But here is the lesson I carry, the one I want my kids to remember long after I am gone. Bad neighbors are not unbeatable. They thrive on silence, on the fear that no one will push back. But if you are patient, if you are meticulous, if you are willing to wield the slow, grinding gears of law and finance, you can turn the tables. You can make even the loudest bully cower under the weight of envelopes, citations, and fines. And yet, the moral is not simply fight. The deeper truth is this: do not let the fight consume you, because revenge, even the most righteous kind, has a way of sinking into your bones. I nearly lost myself in binders and ordinances, nearly forgot the reason I started, to give my family peace. If you ever face bad neighbors, remember that the goal is not to win. The goal is to reclaim your life. As for Chad, he lives quieter now. I still see him sometimes, sitting on his porch, fewer beer cans at his feet, Diesel occasionally poking his head through the blinds, but no longer outside for hours. Maybe he learned something, maybe not, but that is not my burden anymore. My burden was lifted the night I stood in my yard, snow crunching beneath my boots, listening to nothing but the gentle whisper of winter air. I raised my beer to the sky that night, not in celebration, but in recognition. Recognition that suburban wars are fought in strange ways, that enemies do not always wear uniforms, they sometimes wear cargo shorts and smirks, that victories are not always loud, they sometimes arrive in silence. And as I stood there, I realized the story was bigger than me, bigger than Chad, bigger than Diesel. This was the story of America itself, a land built by people who fought not just with muskets, but with papers, not just with fists, but with rules. A land where bad neighbors may rise, but so will those who stand against them. So, here is my final word. The lesson I carved into the frost of that Ohio winter. Bad neighbors are inevitable, but submission is optional. You cannot always choose who lives next door, but you can choose not to let them define your life. And sometimes the quietest victories, the ones won with patience, persistence, and paperwork, are the loudest victories of all.